But I thought, last week is one of the most interesting things in talking about blood. I think there were several interesting things. One of them was that we don't really even know, although it's mentioned in 3 of the Gospels, we don't know whether Jesus actually attended a Seder or not, because it's quite possible that when Jesus was crucified, there may not even have been a Seder yet. We think of a Seder often as old as the Torah, when in fact the Seder is something that was invented quite a bit. Was part of the Greco-Roman world. Has all of the influences of the Greco-Roman world, and so it's quite possible that he had not attended a Seder.
One thing that struck me, though, Rabbi, is that it's been always said that the Last Supper was Jesus and his disciples, but yet we know that the disciples who wrote the various testaments, half of them didn't know Jesus at all. How do we resolve that?
Well, I think the issue, he had disciples, but you're talking about the Gospels.
The Gospels, yes.
So the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, did not have personal experiences with Jesus. Their writings are after Jesus, most particularly John, who's quite a bit later. But certainly he had disciples. So here we are. It's 10:30. Want to make use of our time, and what I want to do to begin with is to take you on a trip. You'll see it's connected to our. So, can you see that?
Is that Notre Dame?
So here's the picture of the Notre Dame, in central Paris. And as a matter of fact, everything is, all distances are measured in Paris from the Notre Dame, rather than from City Hall, which is not that close, that far away. So I want you, first of all, we're going to get to how this connects to our chapter. I want you, first of all, to pay attention to this figure and to this figure. People know what these 2 figures are? This one and this one. So let me get rid of this. It's and I'm going to. Can you see that? I don't know what you can see and what you can't see.
You're not showing it.
We can see you.
We see you.
We can see you.
Each other, but not a picture or script.
I was going to compliment your prowess, but
There.
Now you can see it?
yes.
Okay. Actually, these 2 figures are not next to each other, and they are reversed. The figure on the left is really on the right as you approach the Notre Dame, and vice versa. And these 2 figures, this one is known as, anybody know?
Joan of Arc.
This one is known as synagoga.
Oh.
And this one is known as ecclesia.
Ah,
Now, did you realize that there are 3 openings? These figures are between the right opening in the center and the left opening. By tradition, you enter the church on the right, you enter through synagoga, and you exit on the left through ecclesia. Now, I can blow this up, I bet you. Let's see. Oh, yeah, a little bit. Can you see now what's down here? This is a crown that has fallen down.
Okay.
She's stooped. She has tablets here that she's holding down. She is blinded.
Mhm.
And there are probably a whole bunch of other things here. This is
Looks pregnant.
how they presented synagogue. By the way, the Notre Dame was built in
I think if we're gonna talk, we should.
1153 is when they did the beginning of, it was dedicated in 1260 and completed in 1345. So think about those years. We're talking about from the mid 12th century to the mid 14th century and by the way, the Jewish community, the ancient Jewish community, lived very close by. And as a matter of fact, the street that runs runs a little ways away from the Notre Dame was known as the Rue de la Juiverie, Jew Street. It then became that Jewish area became a for pharmacy. Carol, could you leave that open?
I will in just a minute. Yes, I will, just a minute.
So and what do we have here with ecclesia? Ecclesia meaning the church. Here, she's got a crown. She's bearing a cup. She's got a banner. She's regal. And all of this is purposeful. So this is the front, those two figures in the front of the Notre Dame. Now, I want to show you one other figure. One other. I don't know if can you see that or not?
Hasn't changed.
No.
You cannot see
Still in
that.
we're still in the first two.
So let me see, resume share. New share. Here we go. Come on. Come on. There we go. You can see that, I hope.
Mhm.
Yes.
So over the right portal, it's very small. And unfortunately, I didn't get the part that I wanted. Oh, I went through a lot of different pictures. These are all Jews. Can you tell they're Jews? You can tell they're Jews by their hats and by their beards. But these are Jews, and it's the telling of the New Testament story. Now, the one piece that I could not find is there is, I think, a little further on, but there was no photograph of that. A little further on is are these figures with Joseph and Mary, and there is a wall between them. It may be up here, but I couldn't get a picture of it. But there's a wall. Why a wall between them? So I'll show you where that is. Let's go back. How do you like these figures? Aren't they wonderful? And this is on the front of the Notre Dame. I'll show you exactly where.
Rabbi, were these destroyed in the fire, or is this facade still in place?
No, as I understand it, the most important part of the church was not hurt.
In other words, the entrance of it, what the facade, the front part is okay. It was
I think
everything
so.
behind. Is that it?
So share screen. Yeah, I'm going back to the first one. Can you see that?
Came down though.
Are you seeing that?
Yes.
The Notre Dame. So I'm having trouble moving it over. Come on, move over. Nope. Okay. So this is the right portal. These are the two figures that I showed you. And it's right in here. When you go, it's very hard to see, but right in here are these Jewish figures that tell the story of Jesus' birth. If you don't know what you're looking at, you'll absolutely miss it. So this was, I want to show you one more for right now. And that is this one. I have to go to somehow. So far, so good. Stop share. And now screen share. Anybody familiar with this piece of art? Shucks, I can't get it in the middle. Let me move you guys over here. And let me see if I can move this over. So this, Carol tells me, is the most famous, though there are many others. This is the Annunciation from Fra Angelica. What's happening here? According to Matthew, Mary is pregnant, and not pregnant from her fiance Joseph. One would imagine that, according to strict Hebrew scripture law, she should have been stoned to death, right? Because obviously she's pregnant, and not pregnant by her fiance or her husband. She, well, maybe because she has committed adultery. But in fact, if you read the story that was there, Joseph plans to divorce her. And an angel comes and tells him that she is pregnant from God. And that's, here is the Annunciation where Mary is being told, and this is the angel, I guess the angel Gabriel, even so this figure looks female, who is announcing to Mary, always with a halo, that Carol, and Mary's always in blue.
Always in blue.
Mary's always in blue, that she's about to give birth. So that's all that's introduction. Let's go back. I have one other thing to share, but we'll do that a little later. So our author tells us that, of course, the whole issue of the Immaculate Conception is based on an interpretation of Isaiah 7:14. We'll look at Isaiah 7:14 in a few minutes, which she calls, or the authors call, a fulfillment citation. I think that's a very interesting term. I think that's so what do you mean by a fulfillment citation? Meaning that I think there was a piece of theology that they're now reading back into the text. And so what it means is that here is a fulfillment of a promise, of a prophecy, in the theology of the Immaculate Conception. In the text, they talk about Jesus' name. In Hebrew would be Yeshua. And if you've received any material from Jews for Jesus, he's not referred to as Jesus, but referred to as Yeshua. The word Yeshua, from the root, is the same root as so many other names. Joshua is Yehoshua, Hosea is Hosea, and Isaiah is Yeshayahu. all those names are names that come from the same root, all from the word for deliverance or salvation. And as they point out, that why was this root used used popularly in names? Because it usually signifies that someone is being saved. The name means saved from oppression, from war, or from enemies. Except in Jesus' case, it is salvation from sin. I think that's a very, very interesting change. That in Jewish thought, that name had a completely different significance, that none of these prophets, Hosea or Isaiah, or even Joshua, who was Moses' successor, was there a thought that their name had anything to do with sin, but rather something else. Were any of you surprised to read that Jesus had siblings? Did you know that Jesus had siblings? Possibly 3 or 4 siblings, the most famous of whom is James. And exactly how James comes into being, or these other siblings, is not clear. But some interpret these as being other children of Joseph. And it's not clear whether these other children are older than Jesus or actually younger than Jesus. But Jesus has siblings. Now let's talk for a minute about the book of Isaiah. Isaiah is, there are 15 books that are named after prophets. 3 of them are called major prophets. 12 are called minor prophets. And why the distinction? Well, the major prophets, we have a lot more of their writings or writings about them. And minor prophets, we have a lot less. Obadiah, for instance, we have just 1 chapter. Jonah is a minor prophet. Jonah, which we read every Yom Kippur, is 4 chapters. Isaiah is 66 chapters. So Isaiah is the longest. However, we have a problem with the prophet Isaiah in that the chapters seem to reflect different periods of time. So chapters 1 to 39, and we're going to focus on chapter 7, but chapters 1 to 39 are called First Isaiah because First Isaiah lives at a time when many of the prophets are criticizing Israel for not observing the laws and that they are subject to penalty. Chapters 40 to 55 are Bible scholars call Second Isaiah, and they reflect the period of about 150 years later. So it's probably not the same person. And then finally, many scholars talk about chapters 56 to 66 being Third Isaiah. How did this happen? We don't know. Were there actually 3 people named Isaiah that somehow their chapters were all pushed together into one book? Or perhaps there was, if there are a whole bunch of writings, it might gain legitimacy if I attach them to an already known prophet. In any event, we have 66 chapters of Isaiah, seemingly reflecting 3 different individuals. Again, what is a prophet? A prophet is usually someone who has a message from God to deliver to the people.
The USPS sent me a catalog.
Miriam, could you?
Then I thought the Tyrannosaurus Rex was really interesting.
Miriam, are you there?
Then I decided for both boys.
I don't know how to mute her.
And then,
Miriam,
and then there was the ox for the Chinese New Year.
Miriam. Can you mute yourself, please?
But
Okay.
no, that's for Charlie. Or did I give the wrong one?
Anybody have any suggestions?
Oh, God, I checked on Amazon about that, because I had one for each
You
of
You
them.
should be able to mute her, Rabbi.
Yeah, you
I
should
don't
be
know how to
able
do
to
that.
mute her
It was March.
if you're the host.
How do
You
I
should be
mute?
able to mute everyone.
I don't know how to do that either.
But I tried to make sure the right one.
If you click on participants down at the bottom, does it give you an option to mute?
I'll bring the other one.
I pressed participants.
Does it come up to option mute?
I'll bring you the prices.
No, oh, wait a minute. I can, yes, I think I can mute
Is
individuals.
somebody gonna be
There you
home
go.
in the early afternoon?
Miriam, where's Miriam? Come on, Miriam. Yeah,
I think it's muted now.
Because I'm gonna get the drive.
I didn't mute her, and she's not coming up on my list here.
I promised it today or tomorrow, but he's home today.
No, here it is.
But I'm gonna bring it anyway. I have to go get it. But I'll make sure that
I
I.
don't know.
Oh. Tell me, what were the
No,
code? What was the
I don't
code?
Can someone call her on the phone?
They got wrong sizes?
Talking
She
on
must
the
be on the phone already, which
She's
is. what-
talking on the phone.
he's talking to the phone.
We're hearing her phone conversation.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So participants comes up, but
Okay.
I'm not able to mute her.
Can you mute us all?
I wish I could.
Are you listed as the host?
I don't even,
I hung it up.
I don't even know that.
This is like the right side.
You could end the call and we all call back in.
So I have everybody listed here and everybody's muted. But Miriam and Phil and Susan are not muted.
Takes care of this.
That was the largest, I couldn't, I think I got the
Okay.
largest I could find. But if I were to go to Aloha, which I could do this morning, I might.
I'm the
find-
host, I think.
Maybe I'll do that, what do you say? I'll do that, okay? I'll go look and see if I can find the bigger size.
As host, can't you mute everybody?
Just to go. And I can wait some time before I come to you.
Bill, do you know what to tell him to do?
See if I can find larger size. And I want different.
How do we mute on the menu?
Each of the boys. But that was all I could do. Yeah. You want for both of them a bigger size? If I can find
Rabbi, you could call the office and get a direction from Lisa Marie
both of them.
on how to mute. She may have the eyes.
I don't know.
On the participant list,
Ryan or anyone who can do with that.
What about the
on the
jacket?
participant list, you go all the way to the right and you'll see an outline of a microphone. Click on that.
Okay. Okay. Everything was okay except the swim.
Not even on there.
Okay.
Any ideas, Manny?
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm sorry to bother you with it. I just,
Could we end the call and start over?
other than just looking and saying, doesn't look like it.
And Miriam is on there.
It was so nice to see you.
She's muted.
And I'll pull the Pisces and I'll bring it along with the jacket. And I apologize to Charlie for being the wrong one.
She just needs to hang up. Her iPad is muted. So.
Take care, thank you. Yeah, bye-bye.
Now we can ask everyone to mute.
Miriam, please mute. We didn't enjoy your phone conversation.
There.
Rabbi, we can't hear you.
I'm muted. Oh, there. Now you can hear me.
Yes.
I don't know how I muted myself. All right. My apologies. So the word that appears in the Bible, in the book of Isaiah, is the word Alma. And the word Alma appears 9 times in Hebrew scripture, and it always refers to a young woman of marriageable age. They may be virgins, they may not be virgins. It is the female form of the Hebrew word Elem, which simply means a young man. No implications of sex. So the first time it appears, and you tell me whether, is when Eliezer, Abraham's servant, is sent to find a wife for his son Isaac, and he comes to the well and he prays there for a young woman to come and to water his camels, which will be an indication that she is the one that. So he's coming for a young woman. Is he there looking for a virgin? Probably, and probably young woman and virgin very often were assumed. The next time that it appears is that remember when Moses is put in the basket, sent down the Nile, picked up by Pharaoh's daughter, and Moses' sister watches, and she says to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I call you a midwife? Shall I call you a wet nurse?" It's really not a midwife. Shall I call you a wet nurse? And there Moses' sister is called an Alma. However, the real word for a virgin is the Hebrew word Betula. And in several places where we have the seduction of a woman who's not engaged is referred in Bible as a Betula. And then it says Alma Hara, we'll see in the text, which is the present tense of is pregnant. A young woman is pregnant, not as is generally translated, and virgin will in the future conceive. So now let's go to the text itself. Let's look at the text. I can bring it up. I hope that I can do that. Let's see here. Here we go. My last effort is and I want to do screen share. Come on, screen share. Can you all see?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so the text I'm copying from starts with verse 2. So let me tell you what happens in verse 1. This is Isaiah chapter 7. In verse 1, I'll read verse 1 to you. It says, "In the reign of Ahaz, who's the king, son of Yotam, son of Uzziah, king of Judah, King Rezin of Aram, and King Pekach, son of Ramaliah of Israel, marched upon Jerusalem to attack it, but they were not able to attack it." So what's happening here? You know that after we have 3 kings, Saul, David, and Solomon, and after Solomon, the kingdom breaks into 2. In the north is the kingdom of Israel, and the south is the kingdom of Judah. And that lasts. They do not unite. Sometimes they are friendly, sometimes they're not friendly. In this case, the whole area is under siege from the under siege in 722. They were
Babylon?
no, before the Babylonians. I'll get there. So they're under siege from an empire to the east, and Aram, which is not Jewish and is basically around Damascus, and the northern kingdom are feeling threatened, and they want the southern kingdom to join them. The southern kingdom, the king is Ahaz, and Ahaz is unwilling to join them. And so these two kingdoms, one Jewish and one not Jewish, go to war to get the southern kingdom to join them in the fight in their fight.
It was on Sanherib.
What's that?
Is it in 720, wasn't it Sanherib?
Sanherib was the king of
Assyria.
Assyria, thank you. So the threat is the Assyrians. Later on, about 150 years later, the threat is the Babylonians, because the Babylonians defeat the Assyrians. But right now we have the threat of the Assyrians, and they want to create a united front against the Assyrians, and the southern kingdom will not join them. And so these two kings decide that they're going to fight against, they march on Jerusalem to attack it, but they were not able to attack it. That's verse 1. So now we have Isaiah, who is wants to encourage Ahaz not to join with these two other kings. So you see here it says, and we're looking for verse 7 down here, but here. Now, when it was reported that the house of David, that's the southern kingdom, that Aram had allied itself with Ephraim, Damascus had allied itself with the northern kingdom, their hearts and the hearts of their people trembled as trees of the forest sway before a wind. But the Lord said to Isaiah, go out, so that they're weakening in terms of whether to support them or not. So God says, go out with your son, Shar Yeshuv, which means the remnant will return, to meet Ahaz, go out and meet the king, at the end of the conduit of the upper pool, by the road of the fuller field, and say to him, be firm and be calm. Do not be afraid and do not lose heart on account of those two smoking stubs of firebrands, on account of the raging of Rezin and his Arameans and the son of Ramaliah. Right? Stick to your guns, he's saying. Don't weaken, because the Arameans with Ephraim and the son of Ramaliah have plotted against you, saying, we will march against Judah and invade and conquer it, and we will set up as king in it the son of Tabil. Thus said my Lord God. It shall not succeed. Their attempt to overthrow you will not succeed. It shall not come to pass. For the chief city of Aram is Damascus, and the chief of Damascus is Rezin. The chief city of Ephraim is Samaria, and the chief of Samaria is the son of Ramaliah. And in another 65 years, Ephraim shall be shattered as a people. If you will not believe, for you cannot be trusted. Okay. No, it's verse 14 we want to get to. So this is the job of Isaiah to go and see to it that Ahaz sticks to his guns. The Lord spoke further to Ahaz through Isaiah, we presume, ask for a sign from the Lord your God, anywhere down to Sheol or up to the sky. Now, what do we mean by a sign? Sometimes a sign is a miracle. Sometimes a sign is just something, as I said before, Eliezer goes to the well and he asks God, please let the woman who will give my camels water, let her be the one that I've come here. So that's a sign. But a sign can be anything. We talk about Shabbat as a sign. We talk about, so a sign could be something very natural, or it could be something supernatural. So he says, ask for a sign from the Lord your God, anywhere down to Sheol or up to the sky. But Ahaz replied, I will not ask, I will not test the Lord. That's sort of interesting. He says, you want me to have proof. Isaiah is saying to him, God will give you proof that you should stick to your guns. Just ask for a sign. And Ahaz says, I don't want to do that. Listen, house of David, Isaiah retorted, is it not enough for you to treat men as helpless, that you will treat my God as helpless? Go ahead, ask for the sign. Don't be so weak. Assuredly, my Lord will give you a sign of his own accord. Look, the young woman is with child and about to give birth to a son. Let her name him Emmanuel. By the time he learns to reject the bad and choose the good, people will be feeding on curds and honey. From before the lad knows to reject the bad and choose the good, the ground whose two kings you dread shall be abandoned. The Lord will cause to come upon you and your people and your ancestral house such days as never have come, etc. So somehow this child that's being born is a sign. Now you see here this commentary. I'm going to read to you the commentary, which is from this is called the Jewish Study Bible, and it says. Wait a minute. Oh, I'm on the wrong page. The Emmanuel Passage, Isaiah provides a sign, the point of which is either to clarify his message, his sign, or to verify it. It is not clear whether the sign is the woman's pregnancy, the child's birth, his name, or his diet. Nor is it clear when the sign comes to pass. Immediately, if the sign is his name, soon, his birth, or several years into the future. Similarly, ambiguities occur in the case of other biblical signs. So this is the whole passage. That now what do we call this? A fulfillment citation. That somehow Ahaz is getting a sign from God about this woman who has given birth, and we're not clear from the passage actually what the sign is. That he should stick to his guns and not join in the battle, in the battle against Judea, against Israel, and the Arameans. So who is this woman? Who is this child? We have absolutely no idea. But obviously, Isaiah is not talking about centuries into the future. Isaiah is talking about right now, right? And he uses the term alma, meaning a young woman. The woman is unidentified. It could have been the wife or the concubine of Achaz himself, that the woman will give, that the woman is giving birth. So let me get rid of this. Anybody have any questions about this text? This is the text of the virgin birth. In the Septuagint, everybody remember the Septuagint is the translation into Greek. And the Septuagint, rather than using the word nianis, which is the same as the word alma, meaning a young woman, they translate and they use the word parthenos, which means a virgin. But it can also mean a young woman. He talks about the fact that how many of you have been to the Parthenon in Athens? Right, the Parthenon is reference to the Virgin Athena, I think.
Parthenogenesis.
Okay, let me get rid of this.
Oh, Venus.
Okay, now I can see you all. Open full screen. There we go. Now I can see you all. So they've mistranslated several aspects. Number one, the word alma does not mean a virgin. It means a young woman, though in the ancient world, young woman and virgin may have been somewhat synonymous. They translate it as she will conceive when the text is not in the future tense, it's in the present tense. It seems very clear that Isaiah is not talking about centuries into the future. Isaiah is talking about the present time. That this sign is really not miraculous like a virgin birth, but it's something that happens very, very ordinary. So when Jesus' followers proclaimed the birth miraculous, they then looked for and found a proof text. That's sort of interesting. One might have said it the other way around. The other way around is they had a text that they said that where they were sure that the Messiah would come of a pure woman. In other words, a virgin. How do you say virginess? A woman, and from that they created the story. No, the suggestion is that here they had the story, and remember, Matthew did not know Jesus, and Matthew is written, I think, in around the year 60. Jesus dies in somehow in the 40s. So there's some time that passes. They are convinced that somehow this individual who was crucified and taught was an extraordinary human being, and therefore they connected to this passage as a proof text. Now, in our text, they actually talk about that miraculous births are familiar from Greek and Roman stories. That Aeneas was one parent was Aphrodite. That Hercules was the son of Zeus. That Alexander the Great was attributed to Zeus. So there's a tradition in the ancient world that people who are extraordinary in their talents or whatever, that they probably have divine birth. And we also have this very strange passage in Genesis. Genesis 6. Now, what is Genesis 6? Genesis 6, we have the story of creation, we have the story of Adam and Eve, we have the story of Cain and Abel, and we have not gotten to Noah yet.
Have an ejaculation
So,
out of the vagina.
Vic and Tanet, if you could mute, that would be helpful.
Through the hymen.
It gets into the.
Vic and Tanet,
Excuse me?
if you could mute, that would be helpful.
Okay, muted.
Okay, great. So listen to this very strange passage in chapter 6. This is between Adam and Eve, and we haven't gotten to Noah yet.
I am muted.
When men began to increase on earth, and daughters were born to them, the divine beings saw how beautiful the daughters of men were, and took wives from among those that pleased them. You ever heard this passage before? That the Lord said, my breath shall not abide in man forever, since he too is flesh. Let the days allowed him be 120 years. It was then and later too that the Nephilim appeared on earth, when the divine beings cohabited with the daughters of men, who bore them offspring. They were the heroes of old, the men of renown. So even in our Torah, we have this idea of human beings that are offspring of gods, of divine, well, not gods, of divine beings. We don't usually talk about this passage at all, but there it is at the end of Parshat Bereshit, first verses of chapter 6. And as a matter of fact, I'll read the commentary. The commentary is, legends about relationships among gods and mortal women and among goddesses and men, resulting in the propagation of demigods, are widespread and familiar subjects of pagan mythology. The version presented here, highly condensed from what was once a well-known and fuller story, adds to the ancient myths, the Israelite notion that the offspring of such unnatural units may possess heroic stature, but are devoid of divine qualities. They are flesh and blood, like all humans, and their lifespan is limited compared to the individuals listed in chapter 5. People limited in chapter 5 live hundreds of years. Traditional commentators strive to avoid the mythologic implications of this account. They understand the divine beings to be the noble descendants of Seth, intermarrying with the descendants of Cain, who offered physical attractiveness but no moral standards. Whatever the ancient roots of this story, no Jewish commentator accepts the notion of a sexual union between divine beings and mortals, giving rise to a semi-divine race. So here you have in Greek and Roman literature, we even have hints in the Torah of this idea that gods and human beings created somehow demigods. And if you have an unbelievable human being that you want to attribute divine qualities to, it makes perfect sense to speak about what we now call an immaculate conception. Maybe you have any questions?
Rabbi,
yeah.
what is the translation of Emmanuel?
Emmanuel means God is with us.
So, and the Christians do use that as a proof of Jesus.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I suspect that the hospital, the Emmanuel, was not named by Jews. Now, we all know that Rabbi Rose Sr. was also named Emmanuel or Emmanuel. So it's used by Jews, but it was the name here in this text that Isaiah says that this child that is born as a sign will be named Emmanuel. So it's a Jewish name, and of course it's a name that's given to that is attributed to Jesus as well. By the way, I talked about the Notre Dame in Paris. The Notre Dame was built in the 12th century. What else was going on with Jews in the 12th century and so on?
Crusades.
Right, but the Jews were on and off kicked out of France. So here you have this church that's being built with Jewish images on it. And at the beginning, the church begins to be built in 1153. And in 1130, what did I write here? 1192, Jews get kicked out of France. They only get kicked. Why did Jews get kicked out of France? Because the king owes Jews money. And if you kick the Jews out, not only are their loans canceled, but you can take all of their possessions. He only kicks them out for a short while, and they come back.
What I understand, Rabbi, they were kicked out of King Louis' France, and they go down the road a bit, and they get into King Philip's France.
Well, they're kicked out again in 1306. They come back in 1315. But in 1394, which is, I think, what Philip is talking about, 1394, they are kicked out of France, and Jews do not come back to France until the 1700s. So we talk about, the Spanish Inquisition, 1492, but Jews were kicked out of, England in 1290. And here it's 1394. And they're kicked out of France, and they do not come back to France. As a matter of fact, in the early 1700s, they come into Alsace, which is a disputed area between France and Germany, and then there's a whole issue during the French Revolution. There are very few Jews in France. It's a whole other interesting thing. So during most of this medieval period, there really are no Jews in France. But our subject really is the Inquisition. So our author then really feels that it's really proved that this is a bad text to base the Immaculate Conception upon, and he talks about some church fathers, Justin Martyr and Tertullian, Jerome. And they go back and forth as to whether to use the translation of virgin in this passage or not to use the translation of virgin. Here you have one commentator who talks about who is that woman in Isaiah talking. Well, they say it's Isaiah's wife. You have passage that they quote extensively here from Ibn Ezra in your book. If you have the book, it's on page 280. And Ibn Ezra, who lives in the 12th century, says, "It is to me a matter of surprise that there are those who say the prophet here refers to Jesus. since the sign was given to Achaz back in the days of Isaiah, and Jesus was born many years afterward. Besides, the prophet says, for before the child shall know to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land shall be forsaken. But the countries of Ephraim and Syria were wasted in the 6th century, and Hezekiah, and he goes on. One of the last things that I found sort of interesting was, we have several texts, then Jewish texts that say really very nasty things about how silly and stupid the Christians are, giving it a little back to Christian pressure to convert. And we have in the Tosefta, which he quotes, which is late 2nd century. The Tosefta and the Mishnah are approximately the same time. In this Tosefta, it suggests that Mary had sexual liaison with a Roman soldier named Ben Patera. So why do they say something like this? Well, because come on, immaculate conception. You can go. Don't tell me silly stories like that. Of course, she had relations with someone. She became pregnant. This is really the.
I know, but he hasn't seen it.
Rabbi, I have a question going back to the beginning about, you talked about adultery, but if a woman is not married or engaged and a man is not married or engaged, is it adultery?
Nope.
Two single people, like they're 17 years old or 16 and they have sex. That's not adultery, right?
According to Jewish law, you're right.
Okay.
Adultery is only a woman having sexual relations with a man, not her husband. So yes, the issue is, were Joseph and Mary married? It appears that they were not married at this time. Even so, it's confusing, because Joseph's first instinct when he finds out that Mary is pregnant is to divorce her.
But they're not married.
Well, a little thing about Jewish weddings. The wedding ceremony is really two ceremonies. It's Erusin and Kiddushin, and they used to be separate. That's why at a Jewish wedding ceremony, we usually have two cups of wine, that there are two separate ceremonies. There is what we call Erusin, which is a betrothal ceremony. And that's immediately followed by the Kiddushin, which is the wedding ceremony. Now, until the Middle Ages, when this was changed, the Erusin and Kiddushin were separated by about a year. And during that year, this couple was considered married in every respect, except for the fact that they didn't live together. So they spent an entire year being engaged,
yes,
but not formally married. And in fact, if the couple decided that they did not want to be married after being engaged, she couldn't just take her ring and throw it at him. Isn't that how people break off engagement? But they had to go through with formal divorce proceedings. So if a couple was engaged but not married, which is different terminology than we use, they were considered married legally. So perhaps that's what we're referring to here when it says that they were, I'm not sure what I have to go back and look what Matthew's term is, that they were engaged, and then he decides to divorce her.
I have two questions.
So everybody start to understand that, in fact, if they were engaged but not living together, they were still, as far as Jewish law was concerned, they were already considered married.
I have two questions.
Yep.
One is, I was confused when I read this whole thing about Emmanuel. I didn't understand how Emmanuel became Jesus. The name
It's just another name
for Jesus.
for Jesus, because that's the child. So the sign that so if in fact the young woman is a virgin and gives birth and names that child Emmanuel, and now as far as Matthew is concerned, that virgin birth is Jesus. Therefore, Emmanuel is Jesus.
Nonsense.
However, we're talking about Isaiah in the 8th century BC. We're talking about
Jesus.
700 or 800 years between the time of Isaiah. It's hard to imagine all the passage of, I mean, what year was it 800 years ago? We're talking about the year 1200. I mean, what was Portland in 1200?
The other question I had was, you said that Notre Dame was built in the Jewish quarter, but you also said the Jews were expelled. So I'm confused.
No. I didn't say it was in the Jewish quarter. I said that the area where Jews lived on the Ile de la Cité, the original area where Jews lived.
Oh, but they'd been expelled by now?
And then they were expelled from that area.
Oh, okay.
And those of us who've been to Paris know that the area where Jews then lived was in this area of this sort of slummy area. It's not a slummy area anymore. Rue de Rosier, where you can still go today and you can get yourself a falafel.
Wonderful.
There are synagogues there. There are kosher restaurants. There are more kosher restaurants in Paris than there are in New York. You're aware of that, right?
No.
There are kosher restaurants really all over. Some of them really gourmet restaurants. Why? Because of the Jews of North Africa that came to Paris, the Moroccan and Algerian, mostly Algerian, the Algerian, Moroccan, and Tunisian Jews that came to France in the 60s, because the Ashkenazi Jews who survived the war, were not religious, and the Sephardi Jews who came in the 60s were much more religious, and many of them even today don't really go to synagogue. Many of them do, but many of them don't. But they keep kosher. They have kosher homes, and they would only eat in kosher restaurants. So there are many fine kosher restaurants in Paris. And how many Jews are there in France? Maybe you know the number? 600,000 Jews live in France, and maybe a little less now. It's easy numbers. 600,000 Jews live in France. 6 million Arabs live in France, mostly from North Africa. 60 million citizens of France. So 60 million, 1/10 of the population are Arabs that have come there mostly from North Africa, and 1% are Jews. Now, we've all read about the flight of Jews from France to Israel. To some degree, that is true. I haven't been there in a while to talk with my friend Sammy and see, but people may remember that when Carol and I were in France, I was picked up in synagogue by my friend Sammy, and he took me to his house, and then we had Shabbos dinner at their house, or Shabbos lunch at their house frequently. And one of the other fellows, friends of theirs, was named Victor. Now, you remember we're talking now a dozen years ago, maybe it's longer, I have to think of what year, where the euro was very, very strong, and the dollar and the Israeli lira were very weak. The Israeli lira is pegged at the dollar. So one Shabbos, I came and Victor wasn't there. Eifo Victor, Victor Ba'aretz. Victor's in Israel. What is Victor doing in Israel? Victor is buying an apartment. And the following week, we came for Shabbos lunch. Victor was there, and I said, I asked him if he was successful. I said, "Did you get an apartment in Israel?" And he looks at me and he goes, he bought 2 apartments in Israel because everything was 25% cheaper. Everything was on discount. And what you have how long is the flight from Paris to Tel Aviv? It's about 3 to 3.5 hours, right? Hal is holding up his fingers that it's 4 hours. Well, it could be 3 to 4 hours is the flight from Paris to Tel Aviv. So there are an awful lot of people that have bought apartments in various places in Israel, certainly in Netanya and Jerusalem. And some of them have moved their families there, their wives and their children. But the husbands often are staying in France because that's where they have their businesses. And in many cases, they have bought apartments in Jerusalem, but they still continue to live in France. So one of many reasons that real estate is so unbelievably expensive in Israel, in particular in Jerusalem, is because you have these gorgeous luxury apartment buildings in which the apartments are empty. Sold, but empty. Sold to largely to French Jews who are using it as, they go for vacation to Israel. Some of them use it as an insurance policy that should they feel that they really need to leave, that they have a place to go. But this is the phenomenon. Are the Jews of France frightened? Maybe. Are they concerned about the environment in which they live? Probably. Are they ready to pick up and leave? They like France. France has been good to them. So in many cases, that's the situation. But again, I have not been there in quite a while to reevaluate. Anybody have any thoughts or any experiences being in France? Priscilla.
Well, just one experience, and this goes back to 2017. We were in Paris and went to the Marais, and we were eating kosher food, of course, in that wonderful neighborhood. And a young Chabadnik approached us and started a conversation. And I said, "We're from Portland, Oregon." "Oh, Portland," he said. "I love Portland." So this is a young Chabadnik who's from New York, now living in Paris, doing his shlichut there, whatever he was doing. But he had been part of the Summer Institute out here that the Wilhelms were running each summer. And he had wonderful, wonderful memories of Portland. It was the first time I think he had ever been out of New York and was here for the summer to help teaching and whatnot. So he had great things to say about Portland. You should only have to see it now. God willing, Portland will recover from what it's gone through in the past year. But I have a question. I want to come back to a second, Rabbi, if we may, about adultery. Okay, you said a young woman. Adultery is when a woman has sexual relations with someone who is not her husband.
Yep.
Okay, So it has nothing to say about the man who has relations with somebody who is not his wife or other people. It's
Right.
basically the responsibility or the blame is put on the woman.
No. Both are guilty.
Both are guilty.
Both
Okay.
are guilty and both subject to the punishments of adultery.
By
So because the Bible presumes polygamy,
Okay.
the Bible presumes polygamy, and polygamy is outlawed, not hadn't been practiced for centuries, but polygamy is outlawed for Ashkenazi Jews, believe it or not, in the year 1000. And as a matter of fact, that that takana was supposed to last 1,000 years. So there's humorous conversation about the fact that it's running out. However, we do have one of the issues that Israel had in its early days was in I think it was the Moroccan immigration to Israel. There were a number of men who arrived with multiple wives, and Israel didn't know what to do because polygamy is illegal in Israel. Israel did not know what to do with these families of men who came, usually old men, who came with 3, 4 different wives. And what Israel did was they grandfathered them. That polygamy is illegal, but these old men were not told that they were allowed into Israel. They were Jewish. Yes, the definition is a woman who has relations with a man, not her husband. Both man and woman who engage in this are guilty, and both are subject ostensibly to the death penalty, but we do not know that the death penalty was ever carried out. As a matter of fact, we know of instances in which people committed adultery and they got divorced. I'm trying to think of
wasn't it the case of Cosby and
who?
Cosby? I'm trying to remember the woman's name or the man's name. We read it as in the beginning of one of the parshiot, toward the end of Devarim. I think.
Hosea.
Zimri.
Hosea. Hosea's life becomes an example of the relations between God and the Jewish people, in that Hosea marries a prostitute. He marries a woman who is not faithful. And that becomes the paradigm for the Jewish people who are also not faithful to God. But Hosea does not punish his wife. In that case, it's the wife who's, and I think there are a couple of other examples, but certainly Hosea is one. Hal.
A.B. Yehoshua wrote a very nice book called A Journey to the End of the Millennium that deals with this issue of Ashkenaz Sephardic polygamy, and it's quite a nice novel, but it was also turned into an opera. But
anyway, into an opera.
No, I could take more.
I'm sorry?
Did you say an opera?
Yeah. And I've read the book and I've seen the opera in Tel Aviv, but anyway, it's basically talks about this difference of approach and the difficulties that Ashkenazim had in dealing with the Sephardic traditions of allowing polygamy.
Oh, A Journey to the End of the Earth. It's one of his more recent books, right?
Journey to the End of the Millennium, and I'll tell you what year it was published.
It's a good read.
It's 1998, so it's not
Oh, okay.
recent, but it's a good read. Yes.
Again, the issue of the Immaculate Conception is from a Jewish point of view. From a Jewish point of view, we this passage from Isaiah is not a notable passage. And any scholar who looks at it, as these scholars did, say it's really not a proof text, but it's the proof text that's used to connect the whole idea, because the son of the God has to emerge from a pure woman, and in the ancient world, a pure woman was one who was a virgin.
Is that the only text that they use?
The only text. There's no other textual basis. But what's interesting is the need to have a proof text. The need to say that Christianity is in some way a fulfillment of the prophecies that were given to Israel. And that becomes very, very interesting, where these prophecies are not correlated. Last week, the whole business of Jesus and the blood and the sacrifice, it all didn't fit together. But that's where it all comes from. So I hope everybody has a good week. Get your raise your hand if you've had at least one shot. Okay, a number of people have had. Okay, have had a shot. Some of you perhaps have had 2 shots. That's good. We need to get everybody vaccinated so we can get back to normal. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
I think that it's next week. It's a suffering servant, which is also Isaiah, and it's probably a more difficult passage again. Talk to you soon.
Take
Have a
care.
good week,
Have a
everyone.
good week.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.